welcome Scott Taylor for this podcast. This is a kind of a podcast where I'm trying to demystify what this data engineering and data science is all about. It's all been a buzzword to the entire industry and to the new people who really want to enter the industry. Right now, it's not the trend for the buzzwords to hop into your mind and say that, hey, this industry is very tough. This industry is the new hope, people. If you get to know this, you are the king. So now I'm with Scott Taylor, demystifying what this industry needs and what's the right hustle that you need to put in order to understand what's this technology all about. So yeah, let's just start with the podcast then, sir.
All right. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So you've been evangelizing data science and all about this technology, not to an extent where people actually can go on and build something called as a Jarvis, but getting insights about the data and truly making sense out of a data. That's what you do on an everyday scale. And I saw everything about what data science through your words. Like it's just short forms, but it's like very new way of understanding what this technology is all about. So can you elaborate like what is this technology all about to the world today?
So I really focus on the data management side of the space and the business, the way to describe it to the business in very business accessible language. So I'm pleased that you see the relevance of that to the data science community because they're basing all their work on the data that they get. And I stay away from the technology side, the implementation side, because I really reinforce the importance of why people are doing it instead of how they are doing it. Almost everything I see is about the how to do this and how to learn Python and how R is better than that and how. I'm going, but why? If you can't answer the why, then your business doesn't care about the how. So that's really my focus.
Like you have seen the ways in which this technology has evolved over the course of time. Like I'm not talking about the data technology that we should be working on, but according to you, how has this industry risen up to the standard that we are seeing today? Like it can be any people in terms of data management, or is it any people who are fascinated by the buzzwords of data science? Like what's your experience in seeing this industry grow?
It's been very exciting to see data become more and more of a topic of interest for enterprises and all sorts of folks. But I've been in the space since pre 2K. So anybody who's been doing it since the 90s or some folks even the 80s, now I don't go quite that far back. But there's a lot of the same basic principles are still relevant today. And if not, and probably even more important, the importance of having standardized, structured, highly governed, well-stewarded data to input anything, the value of enterprise systems and the value of any kind of analytics is directly based on the value of the inputs that are there. So if you don't have that good structured data going in, then the stuff you're going to get out is not going to be very good either. And the relevance of that is much broader today because so much is done based on data that you need to have it consistent, you need to have it standardized, you need to have it managed for the enterprise in a way that serves the purpose that the enterprise is trying to accomplish. But it's exciting to see lots and lots of new folks in the data space realizing how vital it is to businesses everywhere.
But like you have been evangelizing technology for a very long time. Like, you know, when I see your talks, I can see like you have been evangelizing about this data space for a very long time. Like, how has this been the impactful part in this hustle that we are supposed to be putting in? Like, we go to the talk and we see a new framework, we get fascinated about it and say that, hey, this can be a new thing for me to start learning. Like how Tableau, Power BI talks really fascinate us and say like some require Tableau, some require Power BI. Like how have you seen that a person making an impact just by evangelizing technologies or just by evangelizing something in data space?
And to be really specific, I don't evangelize technology as much as I do the power and the value of proper data management, regardless of the technology. So everybody's struggling to come up with the new, greatest, hottest, sexiest thing. After a couple decades of this, whatever comes, hardware comes and goes, software comes and goes, data remains. And if you don't keep a focus on that, you're not going to get a positive outcome. There isn't going to be any brand new thing that's going to completely change every way we deal with data, just like there's not going to be a brand new kitchen appliance that's going to change everything we do with cooking. Even if you bought that big new fancy kitchen tool, if the ingredients aren't any good, then the food you're going to make sucks. So these basic truths, hence, the meaning of my truth hat here, I'm all about truth in data, defining the truth, managing the truth. Data managers can handle the truth. And you've got to determine the truth first in data before you derive any meaning. I look at the space as divided pretty cleanly into two parts: determining the truth, data management, data governance, data stewardship, MDM, RDM, PIM, DAM, all these foundational activities, versus deriving meaning, data science, analytics, BI, machine learning, visualization. These are all things that derive meaning out of data, but you got to determine the truth first. It always comes back, for me, it always comes back to that, never wavers. So over all those decades of doing this evangelism, that's the consistency. That's what I always hang on to. Doesn't matter what comes next. It is still going to need data management. Data management is macro trend agnostic.
Like, I've seen people having an hype about like data science jobs are going to pay you in huge numbers, like 6 figures, 7 figures sometimes. But it's a myth, and it's not a myth to some people, because some people have really achieved it. But I really want to ask you this question, like, what's the role of education in data and data space? Like, I'm asking in terms of your book, because your book is 99% buzzword free, and which always really says that like you need some sort of an education through some ways in which people who doesn't know this technology or who is very new to this space also gets to know. Like, I want to ask you, like, what's the real value of education in building up the right professionals in this world, in
I
this
mean,
space?
it's a huge value. It doesn't matter what space you're in, got to get educated, good. I mean, I come from a liberal arts background. I didn't study data. I didn't study technology. I'm not a data scientist. I don't know, an iota of the kinds of stuff that some of the folks in data science, deal with. What I do is I talk about how people talk about it. So I'm a storyteller. You mentioned my book, Data Storytelling for Data Management, Tell Your Data Story, 99% buzzword free. A simple way to explain the value to business people who are not going to have the technical background. The technical how is not as important in that case as the strategic why. In terms of general education, everybody should get as much of it as they possibly can afford or spend the time on. Doesn't hurt. I spent my college days learning about music history, art history, dramatic arts, European, world history, English, literature. Those are all things that help people tell stories. So I draw on that every day. Now, applying those disciplines to the data space is what I've done. If you want to be a practitioner, then you've got to learn that science part too. You've got to learn, programming and coding and all the things that you need in terms of techniques. But unless you are a top, like, half of 1% assassin like data scientists who can get that 6 and 7 figure job, you better start understanding the broader perspective of the world, historical themes, the way stories are told, the importance of art versus science. These are all things that I think widen any human being's understanding of the world we live in.
But what's your thought about the present days professionals who are working in the world of data science, data technology, or anything, because more of technology being accessible. It's like people are coming like, hey, let's just buy that tool which costs around $700 per month, just start working on it. Like professionals
Yeah.
are going behind the tools. Like, what do you want to say about the professionals who are behind the tools? But what should be that one thing that they need to keep in mind in order to build themselves as the best professional in the space today?
Make sure the content's right. Data scientists seem to love to brag about how they spend 60 to 90% of their time munging and wrangling data. A lot of that could be avoided if they met with the data management people in their own company. So how much of that munging, which is, a cute word, wrangling, which clouds the real issue, how much of that activity is based on fixing duplicated data, hierarchies that aren't aligned correctly, segmentations that are conflicting, missing geographies? These four things, identifiers, hierarchies, segmentations, geographies, these are really important structural aspects to data. Those are in the scope of what data management does. If you're a data scientist and you're messing around with that, don't spend that time if you don't have to. If you work at a large organization and an enterprise that's got a data management department, go talk to them instead of trying to do it all on your own. I just see that. I feel like those kinds of statistics are a waste of time. And if you are a data scientist and you're spending 90% of your time doing something that actually isn't data science, then what are you? That would be a question. If I had job A and I spend most of my time doing job B, then which job do I really have, no matter what my title is? And as far as the tools go, there's no tools going to replace having great data. All tools demo beautifully because the data in the tool demo is perfect. Once you put your own stuff in it, that's when you see whether it works or not. Buy a frying pan doesn't mean you know how to cook. Simple stuff is how I try and help people do it. Yeah.
Like, tell me something more about this book. How long did it take for you to write something as a masterpiece like yours? Like, trust me, because I know it's not about, like, sometimes when we don't use the jargons, we sometimes miss out the concepts, and we forget that we are supposed to be giving something else, like giving the right knowledge to the person who is reading it. Also, I do a lot of webinars, like giving the right gyan to them in order to say that, like, after they get out of the session they will be working on the technology. Like, how long did it take for you to understand that I need to write a book on this topic itself, and how long did it take for you to write it also?
So the book itself was my COVID summer project last year. It took about 6 months to kind of get it going. I was looking back at my calendar the other day and realized all these sort of book entries I had, but from the first moment of getting the deal all the way to it being published was about a 6-month period, 6 or 7 months. But it's a collection of things I've been talking about for a long time. What I needed to do was focus them all around a specific area. So I came upon this idea of data storytelling for data management. There are like 20, 30 books out there for data storytelling for analytics. They don't call it data storytelling for analytics, but when you hear the term data storytelling, it is usually about analytics, telling stories with data, putting, visualization and those kinds of things that I mentioned already in helping the business take data and put it in a business process. But there was a gap. There was a gap in the market. Nobody was talking about telling stories about the data, why managing your data is of strategic importance to the enterprise. So the book itself was a collection, goes all the way back in my whole history, where my first data job, I talk a little bit about my own history, just so people have some validation that I know what I'm talking about. I don't spend too much time on that, but just enough to give people a sense of my background. I've got a whole section about what I don't do, what the book isn't about, so people have the right expectations, and just pulled it all together. So I took a lot of the presentations I did, white papers, blogs, and kind of threw them all in a big digital bucket, kind of sorted them out, did a bunch of editing, crafted it around, and then bingo, you got a book. But it's a job. It's I thought it was a lot of work. I'm a decent writer, but it's still work. Got to sit down. It's much more fun to do. Anybody do. I sign up and do your podcast, no problem, right? It's like, hi, I could just talk for an hour, but putting it down on, in a structured form, in a narrative that makes sense all the way through over a couple hundred pages, that's a task. So I'm very pleased with how it came out, though. People seem to be enjoying it.
Yeah, like I really want to know what's your professional journey been like, because not because I when you shared me the link of the playlist which you have on your channel which says about the nature of the data sets, we'll come to the part of the nature of the data sets and things like that later. But I really want to know what's the professional hustle that you need to put in, because you are coming from a background which is nowhere related to the current technology, but like you have really understood the pulse of this technology. That's what I feel after reading your book, after knowing you as a person. Ravit's show is something which is more unique every day, because like every guest that he gets in, of course he's from Pack, but like every guest he get in, like I feel so proud that, hey, I'm at least having an access to these kind of content now. Like, what was the situation during those days when you really started off this journey to learn to be you as a professional, and what was your professional journey whole by?
So I started off in sales and then moved into marketing, but I worked at Nielsen, one of the largest, most iconic data companies on earth. Also worked at Dun & Bradstreet, another iconic data brand. And my role at both of those companies was some form of helping them tell the story about their data, why their data was important to organizations in a simple way. I got to the point where I always felt like you need to be able to have a conversation with the CEO of your prospect or your customer that's relevant to them. So with that exercise in mind, how would you talk about it? You wouldn't do a demo. You wouldn't show a data model. You're not going to show your methodology. They don't care about that. They care about why it's important. And an anecdote I mentioned in the book was when I was at Nielsen, I was bringing a data product to a large organization. In this case, it was a company, a bread company. They make bread, very simple. And I talked to the head of sales, and the head of sales said, Scott, all that stuff sounds nice, but I don't see how it helps me sell any more bread. I was like, but it does, but I couldn't explain it well enough. I didn't have the right terminology. I didn't have the right positioning. And for me, that was a long, quiet drive back to the airport after that unsuccessful meeting. You have to learn from those kinds of things. And you can't just go, oh, that guy was an idiot. He didn't understand me. No, it's my fault. I got to explain it better because there's an intelligent business leader. And if you get enough people saying to you, I don't understand what you're talking about, then you better come up with a better way to talk about it, in my view. You can't just dismiss their opinion. And I became known in the companies I worked for as the guy who could really sell that story, land the story with the business leaders, brought in on kind of, command performance presentations when they said, all right, we've got a client. They are looking at what we're doing. They want to understand it better. I never got into how they did it. I didn't do demos. I didn't, the slides I showed were more the kinds of things you saw in those videos, just, pictures, shapes. I don't need this, you want to, if you get to a data dictionary or you want a sample, then you're past me. I got to get to the why. Again, why is this important to the organization? And every organization out there is trying to do the same thing from my view. So you should be able to hook that in there. But my background or my ability to do what I do today came from a career of telling the right kinds of stories to the right folks around why data is so important.
Do you remember that meme? Not actually a meme, it was something which was generated actually, just to say that, Katie runs and she has a lot of medals, but Scott runs his mouth. Do you still remember that?
Yeah, Kate put that together. That was hilarious.
Yeah, that was hilarious. Yeah. Because like that's where, understanding the why and conveying it in the right way, like they need to understand it. That's what it's all about. That's what money is all about today. If you are in this world and if you are really saying that your data needs to speak, you need to give that proper nutshell explanation saying that, hey, there is some fault here, so I need to clear that. Hey, there is some insights here, so I need to get that insights and work upon it. Like, I really want to ask you this question because what are some of the bad practices that you have seen with the present days professionals today? Like some of the
I
practices
think
that
one of
they.
the worst things going on in the data space is how we talk about it, is that people are, desperate to come up with a new term, a new buzzword. If it's not a buzzword, trying to, I push back as an example, data lake house. Now, I'm not a technical guy. I'm sure it works fine, but I know it's a cute pun on warehouse and a lake, and it's a combination. But the buzz around it right away was like, here's the newest thing, the data lake house. I went, all right, if you go and tell that to a business leader, they're going to think a data lake house is where your data goes on vacation. It just, that term, why have that term? Again, there's probably some valid reasons, but I look at that as an example symbolically of an almost of this constant push for data people to come up with new words for things, new terms for existing problems, new twists of phrase that don't really have enough meaning, that are only there so we can say, look, we created this thing, and this thing is the newest thing, and it's the biggest problem out there that we solve. And so use this thing, analytics, graph hub, fabric mesh, whatever it happens to be. It's like, okay, again, it's not, now that answers the why. And it's never that simple, because when you dig below the surface, you find out, okay, this is the golden rule of data here. Do upon your data as you would have it do upon you. Garbage in, garbage out, rubbish in, rubbish out. Has it ever changed? No, it's as sure as gravity. What goes up must come down. What goes in must come out. No other way around it. So and fighting over the imagery, is data the new oil? No, it's not like oil because it's not, doesn't pollute and you can reuse it. Oh, it is like oil because it needs to be refined. We're talking to ourselves in that conversation. We're not talking to anybody outside of our own echo chamber, our own data bubble. And I see a lot of time, I think, wasted with this kind of debate. Data is the new oil. The fact that nobody can explain it, that there's such factions about what that means and what it doesn't mean in the data space, proves one point I have, which is it's a bad metaphor. If that metaphor is there to shorten the communication process, right? To close the gap between explaining it and somebody understanding it, then it's failed. Because we spend 15 minutes debating what it even means. And meanwhile, the business people are going, what am I even doing in this meeting? What is oil? What? Huh? What? So if you don't have to go far in LinkedIn to see people struggling to come up with data is the new water. It's the new electricity. It's the new black. It's the new tofu. It's the new bacon. Okay, all that stuff's cute and fun and nice, I guess. But did it prove any point, or did you just come up with the latest way to say something? And I think that's a real problem. You don't hear people I don't at least, hear a lot of the other departments in a company spend their time doing that. And as data professionals, whether you're on the analytics side or the data management side, part of what we need to help do is have organizations understand why this is of strategic importance, why it is as important to a company as sales and marketing and finance and operations and legal. It's its own department. People don't have a data department. They might have a CDO, they might have a data leader, but do we have a real data department that doesn't have to prove its existence every month or every year when budgeting comes around? That's where I'd like to see us get to, where we're not having these existential conversations about why data is so important. We want to be able to get past that. Nobody argues about why marketing is important, why finance is important, why legal is important, why operations is important. They just figure out how to do those things better. But we spend a lot of time having to prove the value of our sheer existence. And that's nobody's single fault. But if we can get past that, we'll all be in a better place.
Yeah, when you were saying about the bad practices, about saying the data is a new oil, the bacon, and all these things, I feel that industry has somehow got that standard of saying it. Like if you say that buzzword, you're hired. If you don't say that, probably you're the dumbest person in the boardroom or something like that. Data space has actually inculcated that habit of saying that data is the new oil, data is something which can be growing somewhere, that can help you grow your industry, that can help you grow your organization. But what's the actual requirement for an organization today? Now, what should be their approach in order to understand the data, and what should they be driving out some insights about the data, saying that I'm a company who needs to stay profitable, so how can data help me? So what are the right and the wrong practices that companies have come up with these days according to your experience? Because I want your insights, because there are startups which we dream of building. There are startups
Yeah.
which I've seen which which thinks that data is everything, but simply just by paying money to a decision scientist or a data scientist, that doesn't give a complete insight. Like you need to go beyond the data also. Like what are some of the best practices that you want to say to the companies which are going behind data today?
To reinforce some of the things I already mentioned, focus on the why. And one point I want to make about that, the how is important. The methodologies are important. You've got that. That's the way you deliver. It's just a balance. Most people spend too much time on the how and don't consider the why. So I'm not suggesting you abandon how you do things. I'm saying support that with a rationale that makes sense to the business, that isn't an implementation process. It's a strategic validation of it. So to answer your question more specifically, every enterprise, every company is in existence to provide value to their relationships through their brands at scale. That's my view of every company name a company, and I will tell you they have relationships. If you don't have relationships, you don't have a business. And they have brands. If you don't have brands, then there's no way to give those relationships any value. Every brand doesn't have to be Coca-Cola. Whatever you do is a branded deliverable. The way you get value, 3 ways: grow the business, improve the business, protect the business. Only 3 ways I've ever come up with on how to bring value to a business. If there's something that doesn't fall in those 3, it's either misclassified, you don't realize it's part of those 3, or it's something you're probably wasting your time on, or it's something so super experimental. But when it's done, it's still does this help me grow, increase sales? Does it help me improve operational efficiency? Does it help me protect, mitigate risk? I try to boil stuff down to their basic atomic level to make it simple and relevant to every kind of business out there. So if you think back to that statement, grow, bring value to your relationships through your brands at scale, the most important data you have in your organization is the data you have about your relationships and about your brands. That tends to show itself as master data, reference data, metadata, these foundational data elements that power everything else. Master data, if people are listening and want to know, it's the most important data any organization has. It's the data that you have about relationships. It's data you have about brands. It's the hardest working data you have. There's no data out there that's going to work harder than your master data, because everything you do with data is about something. What is the topic of that data? What's it about? It's about a customer. That's a relationship. It's about a vendor. That's a relationship. It's about a client, a patient, a citizen. Those are all relationships. It's about a brand, a service, an offering, a location, a banner, an asset, ingredients, materials that make up, those are all part of your brand. The nomenclature you use in your business might be very specific. If you're a healthcare company, you call your relationships patients. If you're a law firm, you call them clients. If you're a packaged goods manufacturer, you call your retailers customers and your end users consumers. So the names and the terminology will be very different based on the vertical or sector you're in. But when you take a step back, they're all relationships. So keeping that in mind and staying grounded in that is a best practice, because your CEO cares about relationships and cares about your brand and your stakeholders. That's the main scope of their role. And if you want to show you're bringing value to your own organization, then show how you're helping your organization deliver value to your relationships through your brands at scale. Can't do it at scale without data science. That's the fun part. That's the exciting part. Maybe spend less time trying to come up with something absolutely brand new, and spend more time looking at the problems your company already has. Is our quote to cash process too long? Are our salespeople spending too much time looking stuff up instead of having a consolidated view of customer? Our operational processes have gaps, wherever they are. They're everywhere. Every company's got problems. Data can't solve all of them, but if you apply data to most of them, it will help them. So go look for the problems your company already has before you start talking about R versus Python to your business people. That's my rant on that topic.
Yeah, but like when you really told about organizations which go behind the technology which they are implementing, the way they are looking at the data, I think probably what you said was something which is valid. They need to know how to build relationships with their customers, clients, or any person. They need to know that one factor which connects their product or else their brand with the customers that they are dealing with. Like any let it be from any industry, oil, food, the McDonald's, or anything. They just need to know the connectivity between the customers and people. But like
And what,
you
Tim, I just want to mention, you were asking about my career and how I got where I got to. It took me 25 years to figure all this out, to see the themes, to see the motifs, to see the patterns, to realize that every business does the same thing. And backing up my liberal arts training, that's what you learn when you study art and music and literature. You learn to look for symbols, you look for motifs, you look for characterization, you look for the thematic approach, you look for what's consistent across all these different works of art or pieces of literature. That same mind training is what's helped me find those same things in the data space. I'm just pointing that those techniques at a different area, but that's where I think it kind of helped me.
Yeah, but like last question. You can go on forever, I think so for
I can go on forever. Absolutely. Yes, that much you know about me. Yeah.
Like what's the nature of data set that we might be looking in the future? Because in most of your talks you have said data has to be dynamic. If it sits there on a ground in a box saying that like I'm going to derive value 10 years down the line, probably the same value is not going to remain the same tomorrow if you have the data set today. But like what's the nature of data set that we need to be dealing with today, and also what's the actual approach that we need to have in order to really manage the data, like in your own words?
Those core domains of data are always going to be important: relationships and brands. Nothing new about that in my view, and there should be nothing new about that in 10, 20, 50 years. Business will still be based on having relationships. The data about those relationships isn't just going to show up on its own. And if the data about your relationships isn't very good, it could eventually damage your relationships, especially if it's at scale. I think people should get help. So I worked for and work with companies that are helping organizations manage that data. My experience at Nielsen and Dun & Bradstreet just reinforced the fact that those kinds of companies spend a lot of time and a lot of effort creating syndicated, standardized data sets that can help most organizations with most of what they want to do. The problem is you go to these organizations and they talk about the edge case and they want it 100% or they want it 200%. And they're like, oh, you can't do everything for me? Then I'm not interested. Take a step back and say, okay, what if they can do 50%, 80%? There's some level. And the last I checked, a lot of these companies that we talk to aren't in the business of making data. What is the core competency of your company? So there's a lot of sources out there, either syndicated companies like Nielsen and Dun & Bradstreet, or standards bodies, GS1, LEI, these folks who are out there trying to standardize and bring structured, consistent content that parties can use to interoperate. Go get help. Don't try to do it yourself. I mean, there was a point where people used to write their own software. Companies, large companies that were not in the software business, would write their own software, write their own CRM, write their own ERP. It would be ridiculous today, I think, to consider standing up a department in a bank or a manufacturing enterprise to write their own ERP software. Why are you doing that for data when there's help? Go get help. Go figure out how little you can do in that to get the foundation right. Then build whatever house you want. Then build whatever super proprietary analytics, targeting, insight, customer churn model, call it what you want. But you'll have more time to do that if you get some help building the foundation.
Thank you so much for this amazing podcast. I know this is the shortest, because I thought of doing an hour-long podcast, because driving values about each and everything that you used to say, because I have seen 2 to 3 shows of you on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and I was like, I need to do a podcast with you. I think that quest of doing podcast with you has also been done, and the questions that I really wanted to ask to you also is also being done. So I think today is the most satisfied day of my life, because I did a podcast with Scott Taylor. At the end, at least, this is what really we need as in professionals who are just going to be, okay, the future executives. What do you need? You need to drive values for your organization, because not a company will never remain a company as soon as it goes public. So I think this was a very insightful podcast, sir. Thank you so much. It was an honor
Thank
to have
you.
you.
If this is the best day of your life, I'll quit while I'm ahead here. So thank you very much. No more. I'm done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for finding me. Cheers.